Hey guys, it's Sam for Digital Me, and in this Cinema 4D video tutorial I'm going to be talking about the Collision Deformer. Now I'm kind of going to split this up into two parts. The first part I'll be talking about the Collision Deformer itself and its functionality, and in the second part I'll be showing you how I made this video. I've had a couple of people ask me how I went about creating it, so I'm just going to quickly explain that. So this might be a bit of a long one, so I'll put some timestamps in the description so you know where the second part of the tutorial starts if you're just looking for that bit. Okay, the Collision Deformer. First of all, I'm going to create a plane, and I'm just going to change my display mode so we can see the lines, and I'm going to increase its width and height segments to 40 just so we've got a little bit more definition there. And I'm going to create a sphere, which will be our collision object, and I'm going to scale this down so it's 50 centimeters. And while we're at it, why don't we make a quick material? I'm just going to call it red, and make it red, and we'll give that to our sphere just so it makes it easier for us to see what's going on. Okay, so the Collision Deformer, this object goes under the object that you want to deform. So in this case it'll be my plane. So I'm going to select my plane and go to the deformers, find the Collision Deformer, which is here, and hold shift, and that'll be made a child of my plane. So now you're thinking, okay, well now that's got the Collision Deformer on it, I can put my sphere through and oh look, nothing happens. And that's because if we actually look at the deformer, and we'll go to the Colliders tab, we need to tell the Collision Deformer what objects we want to collide with it. So let's put our sphere in this field here, and then move our sphere and see what happens. Okay, so now we're getting a result. So it's definitely colliding with the surface, and it's definitely deforming it. You can see that it is there. And if we go to the edge, you can see the edges deforming there. So let's go through a few of these settings then. Let's just get our sphere back to where the middle. So let's have a look at the Collider tab first of all. So we've got our sphere in here, and under Solver it's set to intersect. This is the default setting for the Collision Deformer, and basically what that means is that, let me grab my sphere again. When I actually collide with the surface, it will deform, but once it gets past a certain threshold it will flip, so it's deforming from the other side, and that is what the intersect setting does. And if we drop this down, we can see that we've got a whole host of other things. So let's have a look at these. Inside. Okay, so this is basically saying that the collision object is always seen as being inside the object until it reaches a threshold, and then pop, it comes out. So that's what it does. If this was a closed volume, instead of being a plane or something like that, say it was a sphere or a box, it would always be seen as inside until it reaches that threshold and then pops out. Next on the list we have inside stretch, which means that it's always seen as inside. So if I grab my sphere now, it doesn't matter how far I go, this will always be stretched out. And obviously you can see that you can see some of our sphere popping through the geometry, and I'll actually get to how we can solve that issue later. Okay, so that's inside stretch, and then we have outside, which is fairly obvious, quite similar to this intersect, but instead of reaching a threshold and then instead of reaching its threshold and then becoming an inside, it just pops through. A lot like the inside, but just the reversed, really. And then we come to outside volume. Let's have a look at the difference between outside and outside volume. If you grab our sphere and pop it through, oh dear, what's going on? And that's because this will only work with the volume. So let's switch off our plane for the time being. Let's actually drag our sphere down here, and let's create a box, because then it's a closed volume. We'll make it the same size as our plane, and we'll give it 40 segments in each direction, and we'll move it down minus 200, so it sits flat on the floor. And we'll copy the collision to the cube, and we'll move that down here so we can work with it a little bit easier. Okay, so all the settings are the same as before, and we've got outside volume. So let's go back to outside, grab our sphere and push it through, see what happens. It just pops through. Let's change this to outside volume and grab our sphere and push it through. You can see that we're getting a lot deeper now and it's not popping through, and that's because it's based on the box's volume. But when you do reach a certain threshold, Cinema 4D gets a little bit confused and oh dear, we're getting this kind of thing. Now there is actually a way that we can stop that, and that's by using fall off. So let's have a look at that. We'll go to collision, so we're on the colliders tab now. We're going to jump all the way to the end to fall off. And the shape at the moment is infinite, but we can actually make it so that it's not infinite, it's actually bounded. So for this, you get all types of shape. You can use a capsule, cylinder, linear, but I'm going to use a box for this. So select box and we can see our box shape here. So I'm just going to drag the outer to the edge here, and the same with this one, all the way to here. So basically the red box inside, I don't know how well you guys can see that. Inside this red box, it's 100%. And as you leave this box, it falls off to 0 linearly along to the yellow. And that's in all directions. So I actually want this effect to be very strong until it reaches, I don't know, say here. Now that's bound. And if I go into my side view, we can see that it's only affecting this top portion. So I'm just going to actually drag this out just so that it affects everything vertically and only falls off in our X and Z directions. Okay, so now that's done, I can actually, I don't want this box on screen making things difficult to see, so there's a little checkbox called visible, and if you uncheck that, it will hide the fall off box. And now, when I grab my sphere, in the collision mode of outside volume, when I grab my sphere, I can push it all the way in, and it doesn't deform the edges of the box because the effect has been clipped off here. And as you can see, it's all the way in here. So that's great, look at that. And obviously you can move this shape around in any direction you'd like. And that's the effect it gives. Okay, so let's go back to the collision deformer. We've had a look at the fall off quickly, and we've looked at the different collider types. You can add as many objects here as you like. I think you can even add nulls with objects in them. It might be a compound collision, I'm not sure. Anyway, let's go look at the other tabs. Basic and coordinates are the same on everything, so we don't need to worry about that. And if we go to object, we have another fall off. And you're probably thinking, well, what the hell is this? Now, there's a big difference between this fall off and this fall off tab. This fall off tab basically says, where does the deformation effect take place? In what bounds does it take place? And in this fall off tab, it actually is given as a fall off from the actual collision. So where this starts dipping in, this affects this kind of thing. And it'll probably be better if I actually show you what I might mean by this. So let's choose a fall off. We've got different types. We've got UV, distance, surface and collider. With UV, the fall off will be calculated based on the UVs of the deformed object. Distance, the fall off will be calculated based on a straight line distance between intersecting points. Surface, which is this one, the fall off will be calculated based on distance along the deformed surface. And collider, the fall off will be calculated based on the collider's shape. This is the most accurate type, so I'm going to use that. So let's choose collider, and you'll see that nothing much has changed there. Well, the first setting we've got on here is the distance. So this option defines how large the fall off will be. So if I start playing with this, you can see that not a lot is happening, and that's because we haven't really defined a fall off yet. So I'm going to use this curve underneath, and I'm going to define a fall off. We start at 0 here. I'm going to go to 2 and hold Control to create a new point and drag it up. Now, as you can see, that has actually changed the nature of this fall off. You can see the curve goes up quite quickly and then fades away over a much longer distance than this, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. So if I grab another point here and pull this down, you can see that has created this type of thing. Now we're getting some crinkles on the edges there, and that's probably because there's not enough geometry to describe this accurately. So what I might do is select my cube and press Alt and then select a subdivision surface and see if we can't smooth that out, which it has done beautifully. It's a bit overkill and it'll probably slow our screen down, so I'm just going to do this. So now we're getting something like this. And in fact, I could probably make it even better just by dragging these 2 points this way slightly. So it kind of smooths it out a bit more. Yes, okay, let's do that. And then drag this point out. And then maybe create another point here, push that up. And now you can see that we've got this kind of ripple effect. And we can still move our sphere as we did do earlier. And if you go further down, it starts to calculate inwards. You get some weird effects there. But that's what that fall off does in the collision shape. Now we can start messing around with this stuff. Distance. This is the distance from the initial collision. So it's at 100 centimeters at the moment. If I put it down to 50, it will compress all that information down so it's closer. You can see we're getting some issues a little bit now, but it can also be 150, so we can actually make it larger. And all of that can be animated as well, by the way, which is interesting. So let's just put this back to 100, what it was, reset to default. And then we've got this strength, so it's at 100% at the moment, and obviously if I bring it down to 0, there'll be 0 fall off strength. And if I push it up, it will actually make it more extreme. And it will give you this kind of effect. Okay, so let's put this back to 100. So next on the list we've got Restore Shape. And this is great. I'm just going to turn off the fall off to none. I'm just going to turn that off now. And the Restore Shape is set to 100. So if I drag the sphere through this object, this is the kind of result we're going to be getting. But if I put the Restore Shape down to 0 and then drag the sphere through it, we're getting exactly the same result. So you're thinking, well, that's no good. And that's because time isn't moving forward because we're at 0 frames. So you're not going to see the result of that. Even if we renew and click back to 0, I don't think anything's going to happen. No. So we actually need our scene to be played for there to be any update. So I'm going to put a little bit more time on the clock here. Let's go 10 seconds. And just drag this up and press play. And now when I drag through, you'll see that because the Restore Shape value is set to 0, the shape isn't being restored. So let's go back to our collision and put it back to 100. And you can see that it's 100% restoring the shape when it's playing. But it doesn't have to just be on and off. You could have a very low value, so it does restore, but just very slowly. So if we put this at 5% and drag our sphere through the scene, you'll see that it it's like elastic or something. It's making its dent, but then it is being restored, but very, very slowly. And you could even go to a lower value than that. Let's say 2%. And it should restore its shape even slower. Let's get it a little bit deeper. So there we go. Look at that. So it is coming back. It's just taking its time getting there. Okay, so we've had a look at those settings. Let's have a look. Restore shape. I'm gonna probably leave that at 5% for now, maybe. I'm going to leave the fall off at none for the time being. Now let's have a look at these tabs. Include. So the Include tab You're probably thinking, well, the colliders have already been put in here, so what does this mean exactly? The objects that you wish to be deformed, this is where you're going to drag them. So say this collision was actually in a null with multiple objects in there. All of those objects would be deformed. But if you only wanted certain ones of those objects deformed in a hierarchy, you'd put them here. You've got null, you've got, say, 3 of these cubes with a collision deformer. You only want one of them to be deformed, that's where you'd put it here. As soon as you enter something in here, it will exclude anything that's not in this list. And that's what that basically does. Maps, you can use vertex maps and to affect the weight. So the stretch and relax, fall off and restore. So this restore setting here, restore shape, that can be defined by a map. You can paint a vertex map and say this side is going to be 100%, so red, and this side will be yellow. I think that's the other way around actually. But yeah, so you can say this side of the box gets affected like it is here in our scene, but this side it doesn't. So it's a lot like the fall off here that we made the box for, but you can define it yourself by painting a map. Cache, I found this quite helpful myself actually recently. You can cache the movement of each point for the collision. It lets you play animation back smoother, and it's also required when the scene is rendered with motion blur. Motion blur will not be calculated correctly unless this is cached. And also, if you're rendering via Team Renderer as well, you need to cache the collision simulation. Otherwise, where your objects are in the scene... Oh, I've grabbed the wrong thing there. There might be some lag, so your object will be here, but the hole it's created is like back here, and that's why it's important to cache your simulation when using Team Render. Okay, the next tab is Advanced, and this is some fun stuff now. Okay, so let's get this back somewhere near the middle. Okay, so let's have a look at the Advanced tab. This is the last thing on our list actually. I've already done the fall off. So yeah, Advanced. Okay, size. You can see here that it says 1 centimeter. This actually defines how far away the collider's surface object point should be offset when it's detecting a collision. And a really good way of showing this is actually to go back to our Object tab, Colliders tab, and choosing Inside Stretch. Okay, so if I do that and then pull my sphere up, you'll see that, you can see the sphere coming through the topology of our deformation mesh here. So if we go back to Collider and go to Advanced, we can say, well, we actually want the offset to be bigger than 1 centimeter. Let's say 5 centimeters. And I'm just going to rewind this or at least play it for a second so it updates. And now you can see that there's no problem. If I set this to 1, we can see our ball through this. 3, a little bit better, but we're still getting some of the cage through, although it's a lot better when we zoom out. But yeah, it generally sorts that problem out, and now our sphere can be moved around inside our thing. Oh, I think the reason that's happening is because I've got the restore shape set so low, so I'm going to put it at 50. Oh, that's an interesting... that is interesting. Okay, so you can see it's working now, but obviously when you get to extremes it starts to spaz out a little bit. Maybe we should put this back down then to maybe 10%. There we go, that's a little bit better, isn't it? So all these things really work in conjunction. And obviously the cache is also important for when you get this kind of stuff. It's like flickering. So what you do is you actually animate your ball and then you'd cache the simulation, and it would stop this kind of thing. But you get the idea. So let's go back to this, and there we go. 5 seems to have sorted out that little issue. Okay, so let's take this back to what it was. Reset to default. It's 1 centimeter, and I'm going to put our object colliders back to outside volume. And now we can shove this back in like this. So let's have a look at some of the other settings we've got. So we've just looked at size, steps. So this is a lot like the dynamics, MoGraph dynamics. So this parameter controls how often the collisions will be evaluated per frame. So at the moment it's 1 step per frame. So it's evaluated once a frame. You can double that by making it 2. You can even put this up to whatever you like. But although you'll get more accurate live calculations, it will slow down your viewport. You can't really tell here. That looks, you know, pretty fine to me. And that issue we were getting a minute ago, it may even help that, where we were getting some jumping and stuff. So let's put this up to 10, and you can see our frame rate is now chugging a little bit, and I should imagine it will do so even more when I try and move it. Yeah, there you go, look, it's slowed it right down. And that's because it's making 10 calculations per frame about what is going on with the deformer. Now, if you cached it, in fact, I could do that. You could go to the cache and cache it. You'll have a more accurate solve because you've got more steps per frame, but you'll be able to play it back in real time because you've cached it. Okay, so that's pretty much what the steps does. So let's put that back to what it was. Stretch, okay. Stretch is the number of iterations used for the smoothing algorithm to stretch the deformed surface. Increasing this value expands the stretching, impacting a larger area around the colliding faces. And again, I can illustrate this by going back to colliders and changing it to inside stretch. There we go. And booting our sphere up slightly, going out to our collisions, and let's make this 5 again so it doesn't look so weird. And let's put our stretch up. So at the moment it's set to 8. Let's double this, 16. You can see that had an effect, but not by much. So it's 8 at the moment. Let's put it up to something like 50. Now you can see that it's affecting a lot more of the surface of the deformed box. If I put this up to 75, it's taken even more of this mesh along for the ride with it. And if I put it back down to default, which is 8, you can see that this falls off a lot quicker now. So that's all that stretch does. It's the number of iterations for the smoothing algorithm. There we go. So next is relax. Now this is an interesting one because initially it appeared that I hadn't got it working. So again, I'm going to go back to my colliders and put outside volume and go back to an advanced tab and just shove the sphere back in. Okay. Relax is the number of iterations used to relax the geometry resulting from the stretch iterations. Higher values will create more wrinkles during deformation, like a cloth surface. This option impacts the fall off around each collision. You can't use fall off. It has to be set to none. And that was part of my problem, because what I did was I put this in here and went, okay, that's great. Went to my collision and went, okay, so relax is on 4 at the moment. Let's just, put it to 40. It doesn't seem to have done a lot. Why not? And I thought, well, they said that the fall off should be, set to none. So here, I know it's set to none. And that's what I thought would be the issue. But it's actually this fall off that we created. So if we make this visible again and then set this to infinite, there you go. It's having a big effect now. So let's put that back to the beginning. Okay, so maybe 40 is a bit overkill for this. So let's go back to the collision tab. So maybe 40 is a bit too much, maybe. So let's put this back down to maybe 20, halfway. Still having a pretty profound effect. So let's just bring this up and let's press play. Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's definitely having an effect, and that's because we're not locking this off anymore. So what I'm going to do is, actually, I'm going to grab our collision from our cube and pull this out. I'm going to delete this collision from our plane, and I'm going to put this one back on our plane. And let's drag this down and turn off this, and let's turn on the plane. So let's see if we get a little bit more luck with that. So Okay, we've got a relax of 20, all the rest of it, our colliders included. Okay, that's great. So now we should be getting a result. In fact, let's put this plane in a subdivision surface just to smooth out some of that noise. And we can bring this down to 1 as well. Okay. So let's see. Let's have a look-see. So we can play this. We'll grab our sphere. We'll drag that down. Nothing seems... Oh, it's because it's set to outside volume. So let's go to the collision tab, go to the colliders, outside volume. This doesn't have a volume, so that's why it doesn't make sense. Let's just set this to outside. Okay, so now we should be getting a result. So let's compare. Let's go to advanced. We've got a relax of 4. Let's put that to that, and let's drag our sphere through our shape. And this is the kind of thing that we're getting. Now let's go to the collision advanced tab and put this relax up to 20. And already you can see that we're getting these creases, a lot like cloth, which is a great looking effect. And it seems to run really, really quick as well. Look at that. That looks absolutely great. Very, very quick, very, you know, it looks very good. Let's try cranking this up a little bit more. We're on 20 at the moment. Let's go 40. And we can see that the effect is even more extreme now. Which is absolutely brilliant. It makes me wonder if we change our collision to inside stretch and go back to our advance and put this back up to, I don't know, 4 or something like that. That we can, brilliant. Look at that. I mean, so you can get some pretty interesting results from this, all in real time as well. Excellent. Excellent stuff. So let's go back. Okay, so that's the relax setting. Let's put this back. Okay, next we've got stiffness. This parameter controls the stiffness of the springs used to stretch and smooth the deformed mesh. Higher values will cause the mesh to be less elastic, and it will tend to spring back to shape faster. The impact this option has on a mesh will be more noticeable if a fall-off mode other than none is used. Okay, so that's interesting. So let's see. So the stiffness, if I put it right down and then move our thing around. Oh yeah, it's kind of like, it's a bit rubbery. Okay, then let's put that right up to 100. See what we get. Oh yeah, it kind of drags a lot more of the mesh along with it. So where this is being affected, it then has a knock-on effect because the springs between each poly are more rigid. So it takes a lot more of the mesh with it. You can see that as I drag this down, it drags a lot more of the mesh down with it. Whereas when the stiffness is a lower value, so let's go grab that and put the stiffness down to say, 10%, and grab the sphere. You can see that this edge here is fighting it. It doesn't want to come along for the ride. It's just where the collision is taking place. So this value at 100% is causing a lot more of that mesh to come along for the ride. Okay, next, structural. This parameter controls how the integrity of the mesh is preserved. The lower the value, the more the geometry will be distorted and stretched. Useful if you need to deform your geometry a bit more, because lower values will tend to make the geometry more stretchy, like rubber. Be careful with values that are too low, because this can deform the mesh in extreme ways. Ooh, let's see if we can break it. Okay, so collision. Structural's at 100, and we're getting this kind of result. Brilliant. And then with this at, say, 10%. Yes, it's kind of gloopy. a bit more stretchy. Sorry about that, guys. Cinema 4D had a little bit of a brain fart, although it might have been me. Who knows? I didn't notice. But yeah, the last thing we were talking about was flex on here. So this parameter basically controls how easily each polygon will flex when pushed by a collision. Lower values will lend less resistance to the springs, so they'll have a tendency to bend more. For example, wrinkles on a cloth-like surface. Okay, so this flex, when it's at 100 like this is the result. Lovely, brilliant. And when this is very low, let's say 5%, you can already see it crinkling up a little bit. Okay, so maybe this in conjunction with something. Let's bring this bit down a bit. Oh yeah, look. Yes, it kind of bunches up in front of it. Not unlike a fluid of some kind. So you could see how, you know, using this, putting the relax up by maybe 30, you know, putting this stiffness value up maybe, bringing the structure down, you know, a combination of all this stuff could result in lots of cool stuff. Look at that. Okay, guys and girls, let's get on with the second part of this tutorial, where I will be showing you how to create this. Let's just let it play through. So you can see the collision deformer on the floor there, and it's obviously all working very nicely. So let's just get on with it. Let's jump in. So first thing we need to do is create a camera. Right click on it, Cinema 4D tags, and we need the Camera Calibrator. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is go to the image tab, and we actually need an image for this. So let's go find one. I will put this image, I'll put a link in the description of the video on YouTube and also on my website. So if you want to follow along, you can do. Okay, so we've got our image in. Its image scale is 100%, which is correct. So if it's not, just press full image and we can leave everything like that. Then we go to the Calibrate tab even, and this is where we've got to calibrate the scene. So if we actually go into our camera by this little button here and then come out, you can see that the floor doesn't match up with the floor in our image, and that's exactly the point of the camera calibrator. So the camera's location matches the image that you're calibrating it to. Okay, so let's add a line. We've got this add line button, click that. Now I'm actually going to use this wooden beam on the edge here as one of my lines, so I'm going to do that like this. And I want this direction to be my Z direction. So if you click on this line, nothing happens, but if you press shift and click, it changes color. Now you can see that it's actually gone red here, and if we look down the bottom, red is X, blue is Z, and Y is green. So I want this to be my Z direction, so I'm going to change this to blue. And as we can see here, nothing's been solved yet, it's all red. I've actually gone over this in my projection mapping tutorial. I might even put that in the link of the description as well, because I go into more depth, but you know. Okay, so we're going to add another line. So here it is, and I'm going to have this line moving in the same direction, and I'm going to use these tiles as a guide. So maybe up to like this corner here. And again, I'm going to shift click on it. So now it's blue. There we go, and we've got it solved, but it's yellow, so I think that means it's partially solved maybe. Add another line, and I'm going to do the same thing from this corner and shoot it all the way up to here. That'll do, and then change this to blue as well, and it's solved 0.3. I might just do one more just to make sure, and we'll do that from this corner here, and we'll drag this up to this corner, and yeah, I think that'll do for the Z direction. So let's do it again for the X. So that'll be lines going this way, and I'm going to use these tiles. So I'm just going to use this corner here, and then I'm going to drag this down to maybe this corner here, and I'm going to shift click on this line so it goes red, because that's our X, and then create another line, and I'm going to do the same thing maybe further up here, so we'll use this corner of that paving tile, and we'll use this corner of a paving tile. Okay, change that to red. Okay, so we've got some more solved stuff going on. Still got some yellow in there, so maybe some more lines will be good. So I've added another line, and maybe this one's a good choice. Right on the corner there, and we'll bring that all the way down to this corner here, and we'll change that to red. And you can see everything's solved. It's pretty quick, pretty rough and ready, but I'm happy with that. Everything's green. Our camera position is red, it's unsolved, so it knows what's going on in the scene. It doesn't quite know the camera position. So what I'm going to do is press this add pin button, and it adds this here, this little pin, and I'm basically going to move that over to the end of one of my lines, so it will snap to it, so that line, and that basically says that this is world 0 now. Okay, so what else do I need to do? I need to, well, it says camera position is solved, assume distance. So we don't know anything about distances in this scene. I mean, this line here, for all Cinema 4D knows, it could be a mile long or it could be 100 centimeters long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually select this line and make an estimate. We've got here known length Z, so I'm going to click that on. And I'd say that this line here is maybe 3 meters. So I'm going to put 300 in here. 300 centimeters is 3 meters. And that's sort of informs the camera of, you know, maybe its location or something like that. But you can see the grid now matches up with the floor. And obviously when I click off my camera or the tag, the image disappears. So if we click on the camera calibrator and say create background object, it creates a background and a material, which I'm going to also call background. And when I click off, you can see the grid overlaid on this, and it all matches up. Okay, so next on the agenda then, we need to, now that we've done everything that we want to do with our camera, we want to make sure we can't move it. So I'm going to right click on this, Cinema 4D tags and protection. And this basically locks off any rotation, position or scaling you'd want to do. So that locks our camera off now, so I can't move it. Okay, so let's create the floor. I'm going to create a plane. Boom, it appears at 0, which is where we put our little tag. I'm also going to change the display mode to ground shading line so we can see how much stuff we've got going on. And I'm just going to see if this lines up. So if we put this up to the edge of the wall, by the way, don't move this up and down because it's created at 0 flat to the floor anyway. So if I turn off the background, yeah, so it's flat on the surface of the floor. If you move it up, it's going to skew what you think's happening. So you don't want to do that. So it definitely lines up with our wall there, and if I push it up here, it definitely lines up with our wall there, which is good news for us. Obviously it needs to be a bit bigger so it covers this bottom section, and it would be also good if we could see what portions are going to be in the render and what's not. I mean, we can see here by this grey bar, but in fact I'll cover that in a minute. Okay, so this plane then, it needs to be bigger, and it also needs to, it doesn't really matter if it lines up with the edge of this wall because we're going to build the wall on top of this anyway, so it really doesn't matter too much. So we can actually have this right over here, and we can have this right up here if we wanted. So let's grab this plane and make it bigger. Let's say that this is 800 maybe, or maybe 600 actually, because I don't want to add too much. Okay, so that's good there, and it's also good there. Again, like I said, I'm not worried about matching this wall up at the moment. And its width and height segments, I think that we can make this a little bit better. So we've got more to play with, maybe 40 by 40. Yeah, that'll do us for now. Great, so I'm going to drag this plane down here. I'm also going to rename this floor. And this is the thing that we're going to put our collision deformer on. Okay, so let's build our walls, but we're going to need to know where we should be building them. So if I drag this background material and copy it onto the floor, you can see it's projected correctly because its projection mode is frontal, which is great. And let's create another plane. So if I create a plane like this, in fact, I'm going to turn off our floor for now. Okay, there we go. So we've got another plane in the scene, and I'm going to make its width segments 1, height segments 1, and this time I actually am going to, I mean, it doesn't need to be that big either, actually, so maybe if we make it 2 meters by 2 meters, something a bit more manageable. I'm actually going to line this up with the edge here, so there we go, where our wall begins. And then what I'm going to do is make it editable. I'm going to grab this edge here, and I'm just going to pull this up. Control, drag, just so it matches the edge of this wall here. And that is perfect. Now I can go into point mode and delete both of these points here, and that should get rid of that poly on the floor there. Go back into edge mode, and I can drag this off this way, grab this edge and drag it up this way until it matches our corner there. And once it does, I can grab this. In fact, I might... Yep, there we go. Then we can control click and drag it this way as well. And you can see that it's not actually quite matching our wall there. And it might be because... Let's see if this helps. No, our camera calibration was maybe a little bit off, but it doesn't matter too much because we can drag this all the way along here and then just sort of shift this back a little bit. And you're probably thinking now, oh, well done, because now you've got this gap underneath. But if we turn our floor back on, we can see that if we grab these two edges and drag them down, it's going to be intersecting with that stuff anyway. So if we do that all the way down, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now we can grab these two edges, shift click to grab them both, right click, extrude, and do this, and it goes straight up. So we want to change this edge angle here to 90, or even minus 90 even. And now we can push the offset up so it goes, you know, off into the world, so we're covered. There we go. And if I come out of this camera, you can see that it's actually gone quite far away, and I'm just going to grab this point at the back here and shift it along. There we go, something like that, just so you know, it covers us. Yeah, everything looks good there. Now I'm going to need to project our image of this our image onto the plane as well. I'm going to call this wall. And obviously if we grab this texture and pull it onto this, we're going to get the same kind of thing. One thing to note, we've got this little corner section here, so we might want to build that as well. So let's grab a box, cube. I'm going to say 10 by 10 by 10, and you can see that it's halfway through the floor, so we need to move it up by half its height, which is 5. And now it should be sat directly on the floor here. And it looks like it is. So now I'm going to, in fact, let's make this a bit bigger so it's a bit more manageable. 20, 20, 20, and then move it up by 10. There we go, so it's all good. So now I want this to match up with this little corner piece here. So I'm going to rotate it and try and estimate a little bit. I think something like that should be okay. And then I'm going to move it back and just get this bottom edge here to match up. And it'd be really good if Cinema 4D didn't put its numbers exactly where I'm trying to look. So something like that. And obviously the top is not going to... Let's move this back just a tad as well. Okay, something like that. Let's scale this. Oh, I can't because it's a primitive, so let's make this editable. Go to object mode, scale it sideways, just to make sure that it's not quite doing what it's meant to be doing. And I think if we move this back, it's not quite the same orientation, so yeah, we're going to have to do that. There we go, that's a bit more like it, and maybe, there we go. So that's pretty much what we want, and I'm just going to drag this down and call it corner. And really this is just here to, if I come out of this and go here, I can close up this hole at the back. I don't think we're going to need to, but let's do it anyway. Let's grab this back bit and move it back. Go back into our camera view. Yep, that's very, very good. And the top obviously needs to come down because it's too tall. So let's make this match this. And we can see if it matches up okay by when we grab this material and copy it onto it. We can see if it actually is doing what it's meant to be doing. So now let's match this up. There we go. That looks good to me. So there's our scene built, really. So this floor is going to be moving because it's going to have the collision object on it, the collision deformer on it. These two are not going to be moving. So these actually can go in a null. Let's create a null. And the corner can go in it. In fact, I'll delete this tag off of the corner, and the wall doesn't need it either, really. And the wall can go in here, because now we can put one copy of this projection material on the null itself, and we'll just call this scene stuff. That'll do. Now you notice that when we render, everything looks a bit dark and doesn't look quite right. It doesn't look like the photo originally did, and that's because we're going to need some compositing tags. So if I right click on our scene stuff null, Cinema 4D tags, compositing, and then compositing background, then render, boom, you'll notice these the wall, the corner bit, everything looks correct, but the floor doesn't. So the floor's going to need one as well. So right click, compositing, oh, wrong tag, compositing background. And now we look, it looks like our original photo. Great. Okay, the next thing we need to think about is the fact that our floor is going to be moving when it's got the collision object on it. So let's just take a look at that quick. I'm going to select my floor. I'm going to click into the deformers and shift click the collision object. That makes it a child of the floor. And we're going to need something to collide with it. So I'm going to create a sphere. I'm going to make this a lot smaller. 25 maybe? Yeah, there we go. That'll do. And in the collision deformer, in the colliders tab, I'm going to drag the sphere in, and you can see that the sphere is working. Ooh. The sphere is colliding with the floor. But we've got one problem. If I go change my display mode, you'll see that even though it's colliding with the floor, the texture is not moving with the floor because it is in a frontal projection, so it'll always be correct. So we need to actually stick this this texture to the floor's UVs. So if I just bring this sphere up, I'm going to select the floor. I'm going to also select the tag as well, the texture tag, and you can see the projection is frontal. So with both of these selected, I can go to tag and tag, and I want to go to generate UV coordinates. Now it's grayed out at the moment, and that's because the floor is actually a primitive object, so we need to make that editable. So let's do that. And now when I select the floor and then the texture tag, go up to tags, generate UV coordinates. Do you want to include sub-objects? No. And now when we look at the tag, it's set to UV mapping, which is what we want, which is completely correct. So let's get rid of this. So it's got two UV tags now. That's the one we want, so we don't need the last one. There we go. So yeah, it's UV map now. So now if we look at the sphere going into the floor, you'll see that the texture gets deformed with the floor. There we go. And that's exactly what we want. So that's one issue sorted out. Let's get rid of this sphere for now. The other issue is when we come out of the camera, you'll see that because these things are set to frontal, they're always going to be, looking at the same thing, and it's a bit confusing. So you can see how the floor is. It'd be nice if we could get our wall and our other objects like that too. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to call this camera projection camera. Projection camera. And in the tag that's on our scene stuff for the corner and the wall, I'm going to have a look at that tag. And I'm going to change this to camera. And you can see that it's disappeared. And that's because it's asking for a camera. So if we drag our projection camera into here, and it doesn't quite look right, does it? Hit the calculate button. That'll sort it right out. And now when we come out of this camera, everything's stuck. And it makes the scene a lot less confusing as well for when we're working, which is great. Okay, so we've got our emitter in the scene here. The problem with this is the balls are going to be dynamic, so they're going to be rigid bodies, and we don't want them to fall off the edge of our scene, and we certainly don't want them to fall through the floor, which they will do at present. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to choose my wall, and I'm going to go to display ground shading lines, and I'm going to grab this edge here. So go into edge mode, grab this, and I'm going to drag it out this way. And in fact what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the world coordinate system. So this is for the world, and I'm also going to change this to world at the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is select this edge, get its X position and copy it, and then I'm going to grab this edge and match it. So I'm going to put it in there, copy it, and then move it along. So now these both should be lined up. Control drag up like this. Jobs are good. And then what I'm going to do is go into point mode, right click weld, and then control click on this point and drag it to this point. And now we've got a closed system. So now the balls can't fall out, which is kind of what we want. Okay, so I think that'll do us. Let's go back into the camera. Right, we need something to emit. That's our next job. So I'm going to create a sphere. I'm going to shrink it down to a manageable size. So there's our sphere. Maybe smaller, maybe 20. Yeah, something like that. And I'm going to put that as a child of the emitter. And I'm also going to make a copy of that sphere, because we're going to want different colours. So I've put 2 in there. Now if we go to emitter and show objects, click that on, you can see these spheres disappear, and when we press play the emitter is emitting spheres, but we want these to be dynamic. So let's come out of our camera so we can see what's going on, and also rewind this as well. I think our emitter needs to be a little bit bigger, so if we select our emitter, go to the emitter tab, change its X size so it's a bit wider, and then we can move its position as well. Maybe something like this and like this, just so it's a little bit closer. That'll do us nicely. Go back to our camera position. The spheres are going to need a rigid body tag, so let's select both of them, right click, simulation tags, rigid body, and its default setting should be fine. So now when we play, they're falling out, but they're not going to be interacting with the floor. And this floor that we've got here is going to be something that's going to be changed by our collision deformer. So we're not going to want this to be a rigid body, because we want these balls to interact with it. So what we actually want to do is create another floor. So a plane, I want to create that, and I'm going to make sure that it actually covers our area, so it's inside our walls. So we might even need to scale this up slightly like this, and we're going to drag this down so it's underneath our collision shape. So maybe about that deep. Okay, so there's our little collision plane underneath. Now we are going to need to right click on this and give this a collider body tag, because we don't want it to fall, but we want collisions to happen. And I'm going to call this collision plane, something like that. And I'm going to put that in inside this scene stuff thing as well. Okay, so we're in there now. Let's go back to our camera view and hit play. Right, now we've got some interaction with the floor underneath. Also, we need some more time on our clock. Let's put, I don't know, 10 seconds. Sweet. So now that's playing, but we need to put a rigid body tag on, a collision tag even, on the walls as well. So instead of just leaving it on this collision plane, let's put it on the null. So then that will encompass everything in it. We just need to change a few things. If we go to collision, we need to change the shape, not from automatic to static mesh, because none of this stuff is moving, but we want the collision shape to be accurate. So we've done that. The other thing is we need everything within this hierarchy to inherit this tag. So we can go to inherit tag and just say apply tag to children. Rewind to the beginning and press play, and jobs are good. And okay, so it's interacting with the wall. It's doing everything that we wanted it to do. That's great. Okay, so the next thing is obviously the collision object that's a part of the floor. So let's have a look at that. We've got no colliders included in here yet. So let's, we want these spheres that are coming out of the emitter to be included in this calculation. So let's just grab the whole emitter and drag it in. And press play. And oh dear, nothing seems to be happening. So why would that be? Well, it's actually to do with the order of stuff. If we grab this emitter and drag it down to the bottom here and then rewind, you can see already that we're getting results. Maybe not the results we want, but we're getting results now. So this emitter needs to come after this collision object. I think that's what it is anyway. So let's actually put it in between this stuff and see if it still works. Yeah, it needs to. This emitter needs to come after the collision. So let's actually tweak the collision deformer. We don't want intersect, we want outside. So it's like this. There we go. That's better. That's exactly what we want. And this could do with a few more segments as well, but I'd rather calculate on a low poly deal like this. And also we've got some other problems. You can see that wall we created is poking through now, which is no good for us. So let's come out of this and maybe make some tweaks to this as well. So I'm going to take this collision plane out just to see how big it is. There we go. And I'm going to grab my wall and I'm going to make some changes to this edge because we don't want it in shot of our camera. So let's grab both of these and I'm going to move this back to about here. And I'm hoping that should do the job for us. So if we go back, yep, I don't think that wall will be visible anymore. Oh, I took the collision plane out of this, sorry, I'll put it back. There we go. So yeah, that wall is no longer visible. But we've got another problem, and you'll probably notice that if you look along this line here, where the floor is depressed, you can see that there's a copy of these rocks that is projected on this wall. So we don't really want the edges of this to depress, so that's where the collision fall off comes in. So let's go to fall off. Let's say that it's a box. And let's come out the camera and actually start moving this to where we want it to be. The collision plane can be hidden because that's doing my head in. Okay, so this collision, where are we? So we're going to want to grab the point of this somewhere. Where is it? We've got box, yep. There should be handles for this thing somewhere, but it doesn't appear like there is any. Oh, we need to be in object mode, that's why. Okay, so I'm going to take this all the way, not all the way up to the edge, just short of it, and same this side as well. So let's drag that all the way up here until we get to this. And I'm also gonna, I slightly skewed that back wall, but I think we can live with that. And then I'm going to drag this out this way as well, just so it covers. Okay, and then the inner box we're going to want pretty close to the edge. So let's have a look all the way up till about there. And that should cut off any problems that we'll be seeing. So select the collision, turn off visible, go back into our camera, and let's give that a whirl and see if that helps. Yep, so it's all deforming, great, but it's now stretching out at the edge. It's not actually pulling that down at the edge anymore, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, great stuff. The floor. I need more segments, so I'm going to select the floor and I'm going to alt-click on the subdivision surface. So now this should be nice and smooth now. Lovely. It's really good. So that's exactly what we wanted there. Right, everything's in place now. We've got our compositing tags, everything's good. And when we render, it looks a bit horrible, doesn't it? Because there's no lighting in there yet. So first of all, let's create some materials for our ball. So create material. The colour, this one, I'm going to make it red, quite a dark red. I'm going to go to reflectance, get rid of the horrible default specular, add a GGX, turn on a layer Fresnel dielectric. And I'm also going to turn the roughness up by about, I don't know, 18%, something like that. And then I'm going to put that on one of my spheres. Bang. And then I'm going to copy this and keep it as is. I'm just going to change the colour. So let's get a nice green. Let's get a nice dark green. Something like that. And I'm going to put that on the other sphere. Boom. Okay, so now we've got some nice colours. That doesn't help us out with our lighting though. If you look at the bottom here, you'll notice that where the floor's being stretched and that, we're getting these empty gaps here, and you're probably thinking, oh no. But if we go to options, configure, go to our view, and then turn the opacity of up this tinted border, so I'm going to put this up to 80, you can see that, in fact I'll put that to 90, you can see that anything outside, anything that's in this black area won't be rendered anyway. So there's no need to worry about that. It's only in the render in this view that you'll probably see that. In fact, let's give it a little render to the picture viewer. Yes, so you can't see that here. It's all good. Right, onto the lighting. Well, I actually used global illumination in mine, and that's what I'm going to be doing for this. So we're going to need an image to actually light the scene with. So if you go to Window Content Browser, and if you click on presets and then the search button, HDR, it'll bring up this. And I chose, I think it is this Cloudy Park 1. So I'm going to drag that into the material editor there. Open it up, and I'm going to turn off this reflectance because it's not needed. We're just interested in the luminance channel. Okay, so now I'm going to create a sky. And then I'm going to put this cloudy material on it. So you can see the reflections in our balls have already changed. But that's not going to help us because it's still going to look like this. So we're going to need to turn on global illumination. Go to the render settings, effect, global illumination. And I'm also going to change the renderer from standard to physical. And in the physical settings, well, first of all, I'm going to go to anti-aliasing, and it says cubic still image here. Change it to animation if you're going to be rendering out an animation sequence. Go to physical, and I just changed some of these settings. So I've got it on adaptive low. I changed this to automatic, and I changed the shading error threshold to, I think it was like 10%. And I think that should do it. And the global illumination settings I just left at default. So let's rewind. And maybe do this, and then just give it a render. See what it looks like. In fact, I'm going to render to the picture viewer, and I'm going to go to output, and I'm going to change this to film HD 24, lock the ratio, and I'm just going to drop this down to like 800 because then it's quicker for you guys and fits on screen and all the rest of it. So let's render this to the picture viewer. It should be nice and quick. There we go. So now our lighting is a lot better. It's pretty good. I was actually quite surprised that I didn't have to tweak it that much, to be honest. the light coming from that image actually, you know, it makes the balls look like they're really there. Another thing that I wanted to mention as well, I want to turn on motion blur. So our balls actually, you know, when they're moving, they actually look blurred. And I also want to turn on ambient occlusion just to make them look a little bit more grounded on the floor. So if I want to use motion blur, and you want to get motion blur from the floor, this the collision object floor, if you remember, we're going to have to cache this. And also, I think I might want to cache the simulation for our balls as well. So if I go up to the project settings and then go to dynamics, go to cache, I'm going to bake all the dynamic objects in the scene. And it shouldn't take too long. Okay, so now that's done, we can scrub through this. There we go. And I also want to make sure that the collision cache is actually cached as well. So I'm going to hit calculate on that. It'll play through, and you can see the size of the cache going up as it calculates all the points on the floor. So that seems pretty good to me. 10 seconds worth. Okay, so now everything's cached, and that's really important. If you want to be rendering team render or using motion blur, it needs to be cached. Okay, so we're back to the beginning now, and I can turn on motion blur in the physical renderer and then just play it through to a point where there's lots of moving objects, and we can render. In fact, we'll render to the picture viewer instead of being an idiot. Okay guys, so my render's finished, and I wanted to show you this because even though our motion blur is working, as you can see here, and for the moving objects, where the divots are where the dips are in the floor, our balls don't marry up, and you can see that this one's halfway in it, and there's a good reason for this. The frame rate for this is set to, our output is set to 24 frames a second. But the actual project, if we go to the project settings and go here, it's actually set to 30 frames a second. So when it calculates the dynamics, it's going to be at 30 frames a second. So there's going to be an offset. So this needs to be 24 frames a second too. So now, if we go back to our collision object, and we'll empty this cache here, and also empty the cache of the dynamics as well. So go to dynamics, we'll clear the cache. We can bake all the dynamics again, so let's get back to 0. Bake all the dynamics. Great, then we can go to our collision, and we can calculate its cache as well, so we can calculate that. Now, hopefully when we render now, everything will look correct. So I'm just going to choose an arbitrary frame in the middle here somewhere, something like that. Maybe not too many objects in it. And let's render. Okay guys, so the render's done. And as you can see, you know, everything's where it's meant to be. The dents are under the balls, and that has fixed our problem now. But there's something else we can do to make this look a little bit more grounded, and that's some ambient occlusion. So I'm going to go into our render settings, effect, ambient occlusion. Now I know from past experience that it looks a little bit too dark in our scene, so I'm just going to grab this white marker and drag it down to about here maybe, and I'll render again. Okay though, guys, there's the finished result, and obviously if we flick between the last one and the new one, you can see that it's a little bit darker underneath those balls there. I know it's been a bit of a long tutorial, but I just wanted to get all of that stuff in there. So I hope it helped you guys. As always, you can check out my website at digitalmeat.uk. You can follow me on social media, Facebook, Twitter and the like. Links in the description. And if you want to help Digital Meat continue going, there'll be a link to my Patreon on screen and in the description. All right, cheers guys, thanks for listening, bye.